They took her voice and tried to take her life. But the Half-Lakota man heard the truth in silence. The wind moved slowly across the wide plains outside the small town, carrying dust and the smell of dry grass. Most people who passed through the town never stayed long. It was quiet, almost forgotten, a place where everyone knew each other and where new faces were noticed immediately. On a cold morning, a young woman stepped through the doors of a small community shelter at the edge of town. She carried only a small, worn backpack and wore clothes that looked like they had seen too many difficult days. Her dark hair fell loosely around her face and her eyes stayed low, avoiding the curious looks from others inside. Her name was Elena, though she did not say it out loud. She wrote it carefully on a piece of paper when the shelter worker gently asked her. The worker, a middle-aged woman named Grace, spoke softly and slowly, trying not to scare her. "You're safe here," she said, offering a warm blanket and a cup of tea. Elena nodded slightly, but did not speak. At first, Grace thought maybe Elena simply didn't want to talk. Many people arrived at the shelter carrying heavy stories, and sometimes silence was easier than explaining. But as hours passed, it became clear that Elena's silence was deeper than shyness. She responded only through small gestures or short written notes. Even simple questions received only brief answers. When someone laughed loudly nearby, her shoulders tightened. When a door closed suddenly, she flinched. Grace made sure everyone treated her gently, but curiosity grew among the other residents. Some whispered that she might be hiding from something. Others guessed she had escaped a dangerous situation. No one knew the truth. Elena spent most of her time near the window, watching the outside world without stepping into it. She seemed alert to every movement, every sound. She noticed details others ignored. Which people came and went, which cars passed slowly on the road, which voices felt safe and which did not. A few days after Elena arrived, a man named Daniel came to the shelter to deliver supplies from his ranch. Daniel was known around town as someone who preferred quiet work over loud conversations. He lived outside town on land that had been in his family for generations. His father had been Lakota, his mother from a nearby farming community. He carried both histories with quiet pride, but never spoke much about himself. When he entered the shelter carrying boxes of fresh vegetables and blankets, he greeted Grace with a simple nod. "Busy week?" he asked calmly. "Always," Grace replied, smiling tiredly. "But your deliveries help more than you know." As they talked, Daniel noticed Elena sitting near the window. She did not look at him directly, but he could feel her awareness. It was not fear exactly, more like careful observation. He had seen that look before in people who had learned to survive by reading the world silently. Grace noticed his glance. "She arrived a few days ago," she said quietly. "Doesn't talk. Writes a little. Seems like she's been through something hard." Daniel nodded, but didn't ask more. He understood that stories came in their own time. As he placed the supplies in storage, he moved slowly, careful not to make sudden noises. When he passed near Elena, he simply gave a small, respectful nod. She hesitated, then nodded back. It was a small moment, but Grace noticed it. Elena had avoided most people's eyes since arriving. Over the next week, Daniel returned twice more with supplies. Each time, Elena seemed slightly less tense when he entered the room. He never tried to start conversations or ask questions. Instead, he let silence exist naturally. One afternoon, he found her standing outside near a small fenced garden behind the shelter. She watched a stray dog sniff the ground nearby. Daniel approached slowly, keeping distance so she would not feel trapped. The dog moved toward him first, wagging its tail. "Looks like he trusts you," Daniel said gently, his voice calm and steady. Elena looked at the dog, then at Daniel. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook, writing quickly. She turned the page toward him. "He feels safe." Daniel read the words and nodded. Animals know things people sometimes forget. She seemed to consider his words carefully. The moment passed quietly, but something shifted between them. He did not try to push her to speak. He did not look at her with pity or curiosity. He simply accepted her presence. Inside the shelter, however, life became more complicated. Some residents grew restless around Elena's silence. One person complained that she made others uncomfortable. Another suggested she should explain why she was there. Grace defended her strongly.
Everyone heals differently, she said firmly. No one owes us their story.
Still, tension grew. One evening, a loud argument broke out between two residents. The shouting echoed through the halls. Elena froze, her breathing quickening. She backed into a corner, eyes wide, hands shaking. Grace tried to calm her, but Elena rushed outside into the cold night air. Daniel happened to be arriving at that moment with another delivery. He saw her standing near the gate, hugging herself tightly, trying to control her breathing. He did not move closer immediately. Instead, he stood a short distance away, giving her space. After a few minutes, he spoke softly. "You're safe." She did not look at him, but her breathing slowly steadied. The sky above was clear, filled with stars. The wind moved gently across the open land. Daniel sat on a wooden bench nearby without saying more. He watched the horizon quietly, showing through his actions that she didn't need to respond. After a long time, Elena sat down on the other side of the bench. She pulled out her notebook again and wrote slowly, too loud. Sometimes quiet places help. She hesitated, then wrote again. "Do you live far?" "Outside town," he answered. Lots of open space, horses, silence. She read his words carefully. That night, after another difficult incident at the shelter caused by overcrowding, Grace approached Daniel privately. "I hate to ask," she said, "but things are getting tense here. She's not ready for this environment. Do you think maybe she could stay at your ranch for a few days? Just until things settle?" Daniel considered the request seriously. He understood the responsibility. Offering space meant stepping into someone else's story. Finally, he nodded. "Only if she agrees." Grace spoke to Elena gently, explaining the idea. At first, Elena hesitated. Her eyes showed uncertainty, weighing risk against hope. She looked toward Daniel, searching his expression for something. Reassurance, perhaps honesty. He simply waited without pressure. After a long moment, she wrote one word in her notebook. "Okay." The next morning, they packed her few belongings into his truck. The drive out of town was quiet. Open fields stretched endlessly under the sky, and the road curved gently through the land. Elena watched everything carefully. The changing landscape, the distant hills, the quiet absence of crowds. When they arrived at the ranch, she stepped out slowly. Horses moved calmly behind a wooden fence, and the air felt different, softer. Daniel showed her a small guest cabin near the main house. "You can stay here," he said simply. No pressure, just rest. She stepped inside, taking in the simple space. A bed, a window facing the plains, warm light filling the room. For the first time since arriving in town, her shoulders relaxed slightly. Outside, the wind moved gently through the grass, carrying silence that did not feel empty, but safe. The first morning at the ranch began quietly. Sunlight moved slowly across the wide land, touching the grass and wooden fences with a soft golden color. Elena woke early, not because she felt fully rested, but because her body had learned to stay alert. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then she saw the open window, the calm sky outside, and felt the quiet around her. There were no loud voices, no sudden footsteps, no tension pressing against the walls, only wind and distant sounds of animals. She sat up slowly, listening carefully. When she stepped outside, she noticed Daniel already working near the barn. He moved calmly, leading a horse toward fresh water. He did not look surprised to see her awake. He gave a small nod. "Morning." Elena returned the nod but stayed silent. Daniel did not try to start a conversation. Instead, he continued his work as if silence was natural between them. That simple choice made the space feel easier for her. After a while, he pointed toward a small table near the porch. Bread, fruit, and warm tea were waiting there. He walked away, allowing her to approach in her own time. She hesitated before sitting down. Eating felt strange when no one was watching closely or asking questions. She slowly began to relax, noticing how peaceful the ranch felt compared to the shelter. Later that morning, Daniel showed her the horses. He kept his explanation simple, speaking calmly but never expecting answers. When one horse moved closer to Elena, she froze for a moment, unsure. The animal lowered its head gently, breathing slowly. Elena reached out carefully, her hand shaking slightly. The horse did not move away. Instead, it stayed still, accepting her presence. Daniel watched quietly. "They listen without words," he said softly. She looked at him briefly, then back at the horse. Something in her expression softened. Over the next few days, life settled into a quiet routine. Elena helped with small tasks, feeding animals, cleaning tools, watching the horizon during long afternoons. Daniel never rushed her. If she chose to sit alone, he respected it. If she followed him during work, he allowed her to learn without pressure. Communication happened through small gestures. She wrote short notes when necessary. Sometimes she simply pointed or nodded. Slowly, the distance between them felt less heavy. One afternoon, while fixing a fence, Daniel accidentally dropped a metal tool, creating a sharp, loud sound against the ground. Elena instantly stepped back, breathing fast, eyes wide with fear. Daniel immediately raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said calmly. "Just a tool." He stepped away to give her space. She turned her face toward the open fields, trying to calm herself. After several moments, she took out her notebook and wrote something slowly. "Still learning to feel safe." Daniel read the words and nodded. "Take your time. No rush here." Those simple words stayed with her. As days passed, Elena began exploring the ranch more freely. She walked near the edge of the property, feeling the wind on her face. The wide open space felt both freeing and unfamiliar. She had spent so long feeling watched that the absence of pressure felt almost unreal. One evening, while they sat near a small fire outside, Daniel spoke about the land. He shared stories about his father teaching him patience, about listening to nature rather than trying to control everything. Elena listened carefully. She noticed how he spoke without showing off or trying to impress. His words felt honest. She wrote something and handed it to him. "Why help me?" Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it. And because everyone deserves a safe place." She read his answer several times, as if trying to understand the meaning behind it. Days turned into a week. Elena began sleeping longer, her face looking less tired. She helped brush the horses and showed unexpected skill in calming an injured animal. Daniel noticed her gentle touch and patience. "You've done this before," he said one afternoon. She paused, then nodded slightly. She wrote only one word: long ago. Daniel did not ask more. But not everything felt peaceful. One afternoon, Elena noticed a truck driving slowly past the road near the ranch. The vehicle did not stop, but something about it made her uneasy. Her body became tense and she moved closer to the house. Daniel noticed her reaction. He followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual except dust disappearing into the distance. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Ah." She nodded, but her hands tightened around her notebook. That night, she barely slept. The next day, the same truck passed again. This time, Daniel noticed it too. He did not say much, but he watched carefully. Later, Elena wrote a longer message than usual. Her handwriting looked tense. "Someone might be looking for me." Daniel read it slowly. "Do you think they know you're here?" She shook her head quickly, but fear remained in her eyes. He nodded calmly. "We'll stay careful." His steady tone helped her breathe easier. Over the following days, Elena began sharing small pieces of her past through writing. She did not give full details, but hinted that she had seen something important, something that made certain people angry. Daniel listened without interrupting. He understood that trust grew slowly. One evening, while watching the sunset, Elena wrote several pages. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed them to him.
"I tried to tell the truth, the note explained. People did not want to hear it.
After that, everything changed. Daniel felt the weight of her words, but kept his voice calm. "You're safe here." She studied his face carefully, searching for doubt or hesitation. She found none. As days passed, small moments of normal life returned. Elena laughed silently at a young horse's playful behavior. She walked more confidently. She began cooking simple meals in the kitchen, leaving notes for Daniel with small smiles drawn beside the words. But the feeling of being watched never fully disappeared. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, Elena suddenly stopped moving. She stared toward the road, her body stiff. A car slowed in the distance before continuing on. Daniel followed her gaze again. "You recognize it?" She hesitated, then slowly nodded. He understood without needing more explanation. That evening he checked the gates and made sure everything was secure. He did not act fearful, only careful. Elena watched him from the porch. For the first time she felt that someone truly believed her without needing proof. Later that night, sitting quietly near the fire, she opened her mouth as if to speak. No sound came out. She tried again, frustration crossing her face. Daniel did not react with surprise or pressure. He simply waited. After a moment, she closed her mouth and wrote instead, "Maybe one day." "Whenever you're ready." The fire crackled softly between them as darkness settled across the land. Elena looked toward the horizon, realizing that for the first time in a long while, she was not alone with her silence. The days at the ranch continued with a slow rhythm, but something had changed. The calm was still there, yet beneath it moved a quiet tension that neither Elena nor Daniel ignored. The passing vehicle, the feeling of being watched, and the weight of her hidden past followed her like a shadow. Elena woke earlier than usual one morning. The sky was still pale, and a soft mist lay across the fields. She stepped outside and wrapped her arms around herself, breathing deeply. The ranch had begun to feel familiar, almost like a place she belonged, but fear sometimes returned without warning. Daniel noticed her standing near the fence and walked over slowly. He held 2 cups of tea, offering one to her without speaking. He accepted it with a small nod. They stood side by side, watching the sun slowly rise. Silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt like a shared understanding. After a while, Elena pulled out her notebook and began writing. Her movements were slower, more thoughtful than before. She hesitated several times before handing the page to him.
"I need to tell you more," she had written, "but I don't know how to start." Daniel read the words and nodded gently.
"Start anywhere," he said softly. "Or don't start today." There was no pressure. She watched him carefully, as if making sure he truly meant it. Then she sat down on a wooden bench and began writing again, this time filling several pages. The story came in pieces. She had worked in a place where people trusted those in charge without question. At first she believed she was helping others, doing something meaningful. But slowly she noticed things that felt wrong. Decisions made quietly, people treated unfairly, information hidden. She had tried to speak up. At first she thought someone would listen. Instead she felt ignored, then warned, then pushed aside. The details remained vague, but the emotion behind her words was clear. She had lost trust in people who were supposed to protect her. Daniel listened quietly, never interrupting. When he finished reading, he handed the notebook back without asking questions that might reopen wounds too quickly. "You were brave," he said simply. She shook her head, unsure whether she believed that. The next days brought small changes. Elena began spending more time outside the cabin, moving through the ranch with growing confidence. She walked alongside Daniel during his work, sometimes pointing at tools or animals to ask silent questions. One afternoon, they worked together to care for a horse that had injured its leg. Elena moved gently, her touch calm and steady. The horse relaxed under her hands, trusting her completely. Daniel watched with quiet respect. "You have patience," he said. She smiled slightly at that, the expression rare but genuine. Later, while cleaning up, Elena paused suddenly. Her body stiffened as she looked toward the road again.
A different car slowed near the entrance before driving away. Her breathing quickened.
Daniel stepped beside her but kept his voice calm. "We'll keep an eye on things." She nodded but did not relax completely. That evening, she wrote another message. "They might know I'm alive." I thought I disappeared. Daniel read it carefully. "Then we stay careful. But we don't live in fear." His confidence gave her strength, though worry remained. Over time, Elena began writing longer notes, explaining more about how her silence had started. It was not that she physically could not speak. The words existed inside her, but fear stopped them before they reached her voice. Every attempt felt like standing at the edge of something overwhelming. Daniel never pushed her to try. Instead, he listened, allowing her to control the pace. One evening, while sitting near the fire outside, she tried again to speak. Her lips moved slightly, but only a faint breath escaped. Frustration crossed her face. Daniel simply added another piece of wood to the fire and waited quietly. After a long pause, she wrote, "I feel like my voice belongs to another person." He nodded slowly. "Maybe it just needs time to come back." She read his words and seemed to accept them. As the weeks passed, Elena became more involved in ranch life. She helped cook meals, repaired small tools, and even began riding one of the calmer horses under Daniel's careful guidance. Each new experience seemed to rebuild her confidence little by little. But the outside world continued to send reminders that her past was not finished. One afternoon, a man from town stopped by unexpectedly, asking Daniel if he had seen a young woman matching Elena's description. Daniel answered calmly that many people passed through the area and that he had not noticed anything unusual. Elena watched from inside the cabin, her hand shaking slightly. When the man left, Daniel joined her. "You don't have to hide," he said gently. "But we'll move carefully." She nodded, grateful but still anxious. That night she wrote more details than ever before. She described collecting information, keeping records, and trying to expose something she believed was wrong. She never explained everything fully, but Daniel understood enough to know she had taken a risk for the sake of truth. "You kept evidence?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. From her bag she removed a small envelope, worn from being carried too long. Inside were papers and a small storage device. Daniel did not open them immediately. He respected that the decision to share them must come from her. "You decide what happens next," he said. She looked relieved to hear that. Over the next days, Elena began visiting town again, always accompanied by Daniel. At first she stayed close to him, watching every movement around her. But gradually she stood straighter, meeting people's eyes more often. Some recognized her from the shelter and smiled kindly. Others remained curious but respectful. One afternoon, while walking past a quiet street, Elena suddenly stopped. She stared ahead, frozen. Daniel followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. She slowly took out her notebook and wrote only 2 words. "I remember." He waited patiently as she gathered herself. She continued writing, explaining that certain places triggered memories, not just fear, but strength too. She had survived. She had not given up. Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering support without pressure. That evening, back at the ranch, something unexpected happened. While feeding the horses, Elena turned toward Daniel and tried again to speak. Her lips moved, and this time a faint sound escaped. Barely more than a whisper, but real. Both of them froze. She covered her mouth in surprise. Daniel did not react dramatically. He only smiled softly. "Take your time." She tried again, whispering a single word that almost disappeared in the wind. "Stay." Her eyes filled with emotion, not from sadness, but from relief. It was the first time her voice had returned since arriving at the shelter. The moment felt small and huge at the same time. The moment Elena whispered her first word changed something between her and Daniel. It was not loud or dramatic, but it carried meaning far beyond the sound itself. For Elena, it felt like opening a door that had been closed for too long. For Daniel, it was a quiet sign that her strength was returning. In the days that followed, Elena did not suddenly begin speaking freely. Her voice came slowly, like someone learning to walk again after a long rest. Most of the time she still used her notebook, but sometimes a soft word escaped without warning. Each small step felt like a victory. Daniel never celebrated loudly or made her feel pressured to continue. He simply listened whenever she tried and treated each word as natural, not fragile. One morning while they sat outside watching the sunrise, Elena spoke again. "Cold," she said softly, wrapping her hands around a cup of tea. Daniel smiled slightly. "Yes, mornings here like to remind us who is in charge." She almost laughed, a small, breathy sound that surprised her. But while her confidence grew, the outside pressure also increased. The strange cars passing near the ranch became more frequent. Sometimes they slowed slightly before continuing down the road. Daniel noticed every detail without showing fear. He installed a few extra lights around the property and made sure the gates worked properly. He explained everything calmly to Elena so she would not imagine danger larger than reality. "We prepare," he told her. "But we don't panic." She nodded, trying to hold on to his calm energy. One evening, Elena finally gathered enough courage to explain more about the evidence she carried. She placed the envelope on the table between them and spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. "They
Didn't want truth," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued.
I saw things, kept records, thought someone would help." Daniel listened without interrupting. He understood how difficult it was for her to speak these words. "What do you want to do now?" he asked gently. She hesitated, staring at the envelope. "I don't want to hide anymore," she whispered. Those words carried both fear and determination. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we do this carefully, the right way." They spent the next few days discussing options. Instead of rushing, they contacted a trusted legal advocate from a nearby city, someone known for helping people who felt ignored or unheard.
Elena was nervous during the first phone call.
Her voice faded after a few sentences, and she returned to writing, but she stayed present and engaged. The advocate listened patiently and agreed to meet them in person. The meeting took place in a quiet office far from the small town. Elena sat beside Daniel, her hands resting tightly in her lap. At first she allowed Daniel to speak, but gradually she began answering questions herself, her voice still soft but clear enough to be understood. The advocate treated her with respect, never pushing too hard. She explained that the process might take time, but that Elena's courage mattered. When they left the office, Elena looked exhausted but relieved.
"I said truth," she whispered.
Daniel nodded. "You did." Back at the ranch, life continued with its usual rhythm, but Elena felt different inside. Instead of running from memories, she began facing them piece by piece. She wrote less and spoke more, even if only a few words at a time. One afternoon, while riding a horse across the open field, she felt something shift deep inside her. The wind moved freely around her, and for the first time she realized she was not thinking about fear every second. She slowed the horse and looked toward the horizon. "I feel alive," she said quietly when Daniel rode beside her. He smiled but said nothing, allowing the moment to belong to her. However, not everyone welcomed her return to strength. A letter arrived at the ranch one morning without a return address. Inside were only a few sentences written in cold, careful language suggesting she should stop pursuing the truth and move on with her life. Elena's hands shook as she read it. Daniel watched her closely. "It's meant to scare you," he said calmly. She nodded slowly but did not look away from the words. "Are you afraid?" he asked gently. She thought for a long moment before answering. "Yes, but not like before."
The difference was clear.
Fear no longer controlled her decisions. Together they informed the legal advocate about the message. Steps were taken to ensure her safety, and she felt supported by more than just Daniel now. Weeks passed, and slowly the investigation began moving forward. People who had once ignored her started asking questions. Information she had saved proved valuable. For the first time, Elena felt that her efforts might truly lead to change. One evening, while sitting near the fire, she spoke more than she ever had before. "I thought silence was safer," she said. "But silence also hurts. Sometimes silence protects us until we're ready." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Their relationship also changed, quietly. It was no longer only about protection or healing. They shared jokes, simple conversations, and long, comfortable silences that felt warm rather than heavy. One night, as they watched the stars, Elena turned toward him. "Why did you believe me?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "Because I saw someone trying to survive, not someone trying to hide." She absorbed his answer slowly. As the investigation gained attention, more people began speaking publicly about similar experiences. Elena realized she was not alone. Her courage inspired others, and that knowledge strengthened her resolve. The day came when she needed to speak openly about her story during an official meeting. She stood at the front of a quiet room, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel sat in the back, offering silent support without drawing attention. For a moment, Elena felt the old fear return, threatening to close her voice again. But then she remembered the open fields, the horses, the quiet mornings at the ranch. She took a deep breath. And she spoke. Her voice was still soft, but every word carried honesty. She told her story clearly, without anger or fear controlling her. She spoke about truth, about being ignored, and about finding strength again. When she finished, the room remained silent for a moment, before gentle applause filled the space. Elena felt tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from release. That evening, back at the ranch, she stood outside watching the sunset. Daniel joined her, and they said nothing for a long time. Finally, she turned to him.
"I didn't think I could do it,"
she said.
"You already did,"
he replied softly. The sky turned deep orange, and the wind moved gently across the land. Elena realized that while the journey was not finished, she had crossed a line she once believed impossible. She was no longer only surviving. She was standing. The weeks after Elena spoke publicly felt different from anything she had experienced before. Life did not suddenly become perfect or easy, but something inside her had changed permanently. She no longer felt like someone hiding in the shadows. Instead, she felt like someone slowly stepping into light. The ranch remained her safe place, a quiet space where healing continued without pressure. Each morning she woke with less fear and more purpose. Sometimes she still chose silence, but now it was a choice, not a prison. Daniel noticed the change in her posture first. She walked more confidently, her shoulders no longer tight with constant tension. She greeted the horses with gentle words, her voice growing stronger day by day. One morning she stood near the fence watching the sun rise over the open land. The sky was wide and endless, filled with soft colors. "I used to think silence meant weakness," she said quietly. Daniel leaned against the wooden fence beside her. "Sometimes silence is where strength begins." She nodded slowly, thinking about everything she had endured. The journey from fear to courage had not been quick, but each step mattered. As the investigation moved forward, Elena was asked to share her experience with others who felt unheard. At first she hesitated. Speaking publicly still felt difficult, and she worried about saying the wrong words. But she remembered how alone she had felt at the beginning. If her story could help even one person feel less alone, maybe it was worth it. Her first visit back to the shelter where she had arrived months earlier was emotional. Grace greeted her warmly, surprised and proud to see the change in her. "You look stronger," Grace said gently.
Elena smiled softly. "I feel
stronger." Some of the residents recognized her. They watched as she spoke with calm honesty about healing, patience, and finding support in unexpected places. She did not tell every detail of her past. Instead, she focused on hope, on how listening without pressure had helped her rediscover her voice. After the meeting, a young woman approached her quietly and thanked her for sharing. Elena realized that her journey now had meaning beyond her own survival. Back at the ranch, life continued with simple routines. She helped with chores, cooked meals, and spent long afternoons riding through the fields. Daniel remained steady as always, offering support without trying to control her path. One evening, while they sat near a small fire, Elena turned toward him. "I stayed alive because someone listened," she said. He smiled slightly. "You stayed alive because you're strong." She shook her head gently. Both, their connection had grown into something deep and quiet, built not on dramatic moments but on trust, patience, and shared understanding. They rarely spoke about feelings directly, but their actions showed everything that needed to be said. As months passed, the investigation reached important milestones. People responsible for ignoring the truth were held accountable through proper channels. Elena followed the updates calmly, no longer feeling overwhelmed by the process. She realized that justice was not only about outcomes. It was also about reclaiming her own story. One afternoon, she received a letter from someone who had heard her speak publicly. The letter described how her courage had inspired another person to step forward and share their own experience. Elena read the words several times, tears forming in her eyes. "This is bigger than me," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Your voice travels further than you think." The ranch slowly became a place where others visited for quiet support. Elena and Daniel never called it a program or organization. It was simply a safe space where people could sit, breathe, and feel heard. Sometimes visitors talked openly. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Elena understood both. She learned that listening was not about fixing someone immediately. It was about being present. One evening, while walking through the fields, Elena stopped suddenly and looked around. The wind moved gently through the grass, and the sky stretched endlessly above her. "I'm not afraid of silence anymore," she said. Daniel stood beside her. "What do you hear now?" Myself closed her eyes for a moment. Myself. The word felt powerful. As time passed, Elena's voice grew stronger and more natural. She laughed more often, told small stories about her childhood, and even teased Daniel occasionally about his quiet nature. He accepted it with a calm smile. Their relationship evolved slowly, never rushed. It was built on mutual respect and shared growth. Neither felt the need to define it quickly. Being together felt enough. One morning, while preparing breakfast, Elena realized she had spoken several full sentences without thinking about it. The fear that once blocked her voice had faded into memory. She paused, surprised by her own progress. Daniel noticed her expression. "What happened?" She laughed lightly. "Nothing and everything." Later that day, they rode out toward a hill overlooking the land. The view stretched far beyond the ranch, reminding Elena of how small she had once felt compared to the world. Now she felt different, not larger than the world, but stronger within it. "I used to believe my story ended in silence," she said. Daniel listened quietly. "But silence was only the beginning," she continued. The wind moved gently around them, carrying her words into the open sky. As the sun began to set, casting warm colors across the horizon, Elena felt a deep sense of peace. She had not erased her past, but she had transformed her relationship with it. She was no longer defined by fear. She was defined by courage, patience, and the decision to keep moving forward. That evening they returned to the ranch, walking side by side. The animals moved calmly around them, and the air felt soft and welcoming. Elena stopped near the porch and looked at Daniel. "Thank you for listening," she said. He shook his head gently. "You found your voice. I just stayed nearby." She smiled, understanding the humility in his words. The story did not end with dramatic celebrations or perfect closure. Instead, it ended with something quieter and more real. A woman standing firmly in her truth, a man who understood the power of patience, and a future shaped by trust rather than fear. As night fell across the wide plains, Elena stood outside for a moment longer, breathing deeply. Her voice, once hidden behind silence, now belonged fully to her.